Hi everybody, and thanks for joining me. What I'd like to do is just spend the next few minutes just looking at school culture really, and as you can see from the slide on the screen, school culture that's based on the concept of kindness. In order to do this, I want us to think about one thing really specifically, and that's really about adults and adults' behaviour and us when we're in schools and when we're trying to create culture. So as you can see from there, what I've done is I've taken a little snapshot of a famous song. Admittedly, that song is from the 90s, so some of you won't obviously recognise it. But really, it's just about the weather. And what you can see there from Crowded House in 1992, everywhere you go, you always take the weather with you. And basically what that says to me is that adults always make the weather. And whether you're gloomy or whether you're shiny, that is reflected in school and in the culture of the school. And we've got a real big part to play when it comes to making sure that our mood reflects what we want to achieve in a school. And adults always make the weather, you always make the weather, and that's our starting point. What I would like to share with you is something that I call creating a cultural equation, your cultural equation, something that you need to be really, really aware of when you're building culture in a school and you're looking for that culture that really, really counts. As you can see, I've put in front of you a little equation, V plus V plus V equals C. Now, you'll probably be guessing when we're talking about culture that what you're probably guessing, what does that mean? What does the V mean and what does the C mean? Well, it's dead straightforward. That's what it means. Values plus values plus values equals culture. However, it's not as straightforward as that. And the problem that we've got with all of this is that we can say what our values are all the time. We can constantly say, yes, we're the best school in the world. And if I know that if I go on a school's website, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see the best school in the world on a great website that says our values and our culture are absolutely solid. But that's not always the case when it plays out in school. So actually our cultural equation is a little bit more complicated than that. Our cultural equation is very much LV, not just V. And quite simply, that just means our lived values. We have to be able to live our values to create our culture, and our culture comes from those lived values. One of the things that I've always believed in is looking at something called cultural positioning. We've got choices, particularly as school leaders, but all the way through the school, we've got a choice of where we position our culture. And I can just give you some examples of that. What you can see there is an example from a newspaper, the Test newspaper, in 2018. And in 2018, that guy there, don't know him, I've got no gripe with him, this is nothing personal whatsoever, it's just that this is in the news, this was in the newspaper. What you can see there is an advocation of really harsh punishments as being the behaviour silver bullet. Now, I find that extremely worrying. It's not something that I would advocate. It's something that worries me greatly. However, what I can show you is a different cultural position, and that cultural position is my school at a similar time back in 2018, and you can see straight away from those headlines that there is a massive difference between those two cultures and what we're trying to portray and what we believe in. Now, what I found sort of quite scary at the time when that article went live was that that it was actually deemed appropriate or newsworthy, in fact, to say that a school and celebrate that a school was kind to children. Now, what I'd argue is that it shouldn't be newsworthy. We shouldn't be having to go into the Guardian newspaper on a national scale and talk about kind schools. All schools should be kind to children. And the other thing that is sort of slightly worrying was at the time, somebody decided they would write a blog about me because of reading that article. And the blog that was written about me actually said that I was a danger to the teaching profession. And what they were clearly doing was, the misconception around that article was that if you're kind to children, then the children must not behave very well and they must be able to get away with anything, and there must be chaos in the school, which is absolute nonsense. And what's really, really important is when we're looking at school culture and creating school culture, that what we're not doing is saying that by being kind to children, we are being soft on children and letting them get away with stuff. We can still have really, really high expectations. We absolutely can have really high expectations. We don't have to be the school who lets kids get away with it because we're kind to them. That's just absolute nonsense. So this whole concept of cultural positioning starts with where you want to be, the culture that you want to create and what forms that culture. And what I would like to do is just chat very briefly about unconditional positive regard. Some of you may have heard of this, some of you may understand it, but for those who don't, what I'd like to do is just take an opportunity to just go through it really, really quickly. And hopefully what you'll do is you'll get an idea of how we can position unconditional positive regard at the heart of the culture when we're doing our own cultural positioning. Now, unconditional positive regard came from this guy, Carl Rogers, who was no longer with us, but an American psychologist, basically. And that American psychologist coined the phrase unconditional positive regard from the work of counsellors, the work of psychologists, not educationalists. But it's something that I feel is really, really relevant to us and something that we can just lift up and drop into schools. So what I've done is I've just highlighted for you a couple of things that I think that when you're building your cultural position, you really need to think about. And it obviously links to this concept of unconditional positive regard. So in a nutshell, what we've got is, first of all, we must not forget that we are a caring profession. We are absolutely a caring profession. And first and foremost, that's what should be at the heart of our culture, which we care and we genuinely care about the children. You can see on there that I've also highlighted the concept of no personal gratification. No personal gratification is just a little reminder that we work in our profession not about us. It's not about us. It's not about our own personal gratification. Now, don't get me wrong. It's great to have personal gratification. And when you're teaching, there's nothing finer than the personal gratification, the dopamine release that you can get from having a great lesson or having great relationships with children. But what I am trying to say is it's not about us, and it mustn't ever be just about us because it's about the children. So that leads us into this next highlighted red phrase that we've got there, which is great from Carl Rogers, which is, I care, not I care for you if you behave thus and so. That's so important to remember, really important to remember that unconditional positive regard genuinely means it's unconditional. We're not actually seeking to change those children and make them do something in a way that we can care for them. What we're essentially saying is we're going to care for them anyway, come what may. What's really important to us when we're creating culture in schools is the next highlighted a few words, which is a safety creating climate. It is so important that our schools are safe. And that doesn't mean making sure that we've got great fire exits and good fire drills. What we're talking about is emotional safety, and so that the children can come into the school on a morning and feel emotionally safe. And then that leads us obviously to unconditional positive regard. So what I'd like to do is I'd like you just to think really, really clearly about this, and when you're cultural position, and think, if a therapist can do it, then surely you can too. So finally, what does it mean, unconditional positive regard? In really four really clear things for you to take away. The first one is about being genuine, you being genuine and really and truly believing that you are in the right place, doing the right thing with the right kids at the right time. And it's an authenticity that comes with that. The next one is about acceptance. We have to be able to understand that people are different to us, and we have to be able to accept them. And we're not looking for compliance all the time. We're not looking to change children. Now, what we can do is help them with their behaviour and make their behaviour appropriate, but we're not looking to change them. Third one is massive, empathy. Not sympathy, empathy. And empathy is so important because we're not talking about feeling sorry for the children. We're talking about genuinely seeing the world through their lens. And if we can see the world through their lens, it helps us to position ourselves far, far better to be able to deal with their behaviour and their lives. And the last one is self-actualization. Self-actualization for you, making sure that what you're doing is you're working in the right environment, with the right culture, with the right people and the right children, so that your own personal cultural position fits the organisation that you're working in. So it's so important that you just look at unconditional positive regard in those four really clear things, and hopefully that'll help you shift your cultural positioning into the place that really, really suits you and you're able to thrive.